Doom's castle in Loki. When Loki introduced the Citadel at the end of time, a lot of fans instantly felt that deja vu, because visually the Citadel doesn't read like a typical Kang structure. It isn't sleek, it isn't futuristic, and it doesn't feel techy the way the TVA does. Instead, it looks ancient, monolithic, gothic, almost medieval, tall spires, harsh stone, and this heavy sense of isolation and finality. And for comic readers, that vibe rings a very specific bell. The Citadel can easily remind you of Dr. Doom's castle, that same looming fortress energy you associate with Latveria in the comics, where the building isn't just a home, it's a symbol of absolute control. One ruler on the throne, one domain at the edge of everything. That resemblance feels even harder to ignore once Loki and Sylvie step inside. The interior comes off ceremonial, and along the way, you see huge cloaked, hooded statues standing like silent sentinels. They aren't introduced or explained, they're just there, and visually that can feel closer to Doom imagery than Kang imagery, because Doom is constantly framed as cloaked, imposing, and almost statue-like, a ruler who mythologizes himself, while Kang is usually depicted as a conqueror surrounded by technology, not monuments. And there's another subtle point people overlook. The Citadel isn't necessarily Kang's natural home. He Who Remains basically presents it as the place he ended up in to wait at the end of time, not a flashy throne world built for conquest. So when fans say the Citadel looks more like Doom's castle than a Kang base, they aren't literally saying Doom was hiding there. They're saying Marvel may have already defined what ultimate power looks like in the MCU. And aesthetically, it doesn't look like clean sci-fi Kang tech. Doom box in Moon Knight. Moon Knight is one of the weirdest MCU projects, so fans started combing through it for hidden clues. From episode 1, the show feels slightly off. There are no Avengers mentions and no real blip callbacks. It almost plays like it's intentionally detached. And it starts the moment Stephen Grant blacks out and wakes up in a place that doesn't feel like London, or anywhere we immediately recognize. When Stephen comes to in that grassy field, the camera slowly pulls back and reveals a small village in the distance. Older rooftops, stone buildings, a very specific European vibe, and high above it all, perched on the mountain, a huge castle. That single shot set off alarms for comic readers, because the silhouette looks weirdly close to how Dr. Doom's castle is often framed in the comics. A fortress looming over Doomstadt/Latveria, tall, intimidating, isolated, and shot like a symbol of control rather than beauty. Even the winding road down from the castle matches the way Doom's domain is frequently drawn on the page. Now here's where it gets spicy. During Stephen's escape, when he hides inside the ice cream truck and blacks out again, the camera lingers just long enough to show a box behind him. On it, you can make out letters like Von D/Vondi, which fans took as a hint that Stephen might actually be near Latveria, where Doom rules. If Marvel placed that detail on purpose, it would be a classic breadcrumb, seeding Victor Von Doom ideas before ever officially announcing him for future MCU projects. Doctor Strange 2 used Doom's tech. In Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the big headline moment most people remember is John Krasinski finally showing up as Reed Richards. I was also hoping for Emily Blunt, but that's fine. I'm still happy with our current Sue Storm. But the more interesting detail isn't who Krasinski played, it's how he arrived. When Strange is first brought before the Illuminati of Earth 838, Reed isn't there at first. He suddenly appears on a circular platform right after Master Mordo announces him. Later, producer Richie Palmer confirmed this wasn't just a generic portal effect. The device Reed uses is directly inspired by Dr. Victor Von Doom's time platform from the comics, a piece of tech Doom is famously associated with. In Marvel lore, the time platform isn't simply a teleport pad. It's Doom-level technology that allows precise movement through time and space. And it's the kind of thing even Reed Richards usually doesn't build without Doom's fingerprints somewhere in the background. It's also tied to time travel stories that connect to Kang, including run-ins with one of Kang's earliest identities. What makes this detail even more interesting is where it shows up. Earth 838 is meant to be more advanced than the main MCU timeline. So instead of revealing Doom directly, Marvel shows us a world where his tech already exists and is casually used by the smartest man alive. That quietly lines up with the MCU's broader time travel arc, from Loki introducing He Who Remains to Kang being framed as the saga's central threat in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Doom's tech appearing before Doom himself is exactly the kind of breadcrumb Marvel likes to drop. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean Marvel had Doom fully locked in from the start. The right situation alone makes that hard to believe, but it does suggest that by the time Multiverse of Madness was being written, Marvel was already planting conceptual groundwork. sneaking in Doom ideas without actually introducing Doom as a character. Kang hit Dr. Doom. Another clue people keep floating online claims that Kang didn't just manipulate timelines. He went after Victor Von Doom directly. The idea goes like this. Kang supposedly knew Doom was inevitable, too brilliant and too dangerous. The kind of man who would eventually march into his citadel and rip apart the entire multiversal order. So instead of wiping him out, Kang did something more strategic. He rerouted him. In this theory, Doom didn't vanish. He was rewritten, reshaped into Tony Stark. Same level of genius, the same need for control, the same obsession with building the future. Same mind that could eventually crack time travel, just aimed at a different destination. In this version, Tony becoming Iron Man wasn't a random accident. It was a guided outcome, because Kang needed time travel to exist at all. Without it, there's no TVA, no sacred timeline, and no He Who Remains sitting at the end of time. Fans also point out how Doom and Stark share the same core traits: ego, genius, futurism, obsession with legacy, and a way of connecting dots that feels right on an emotional level. Even if it's not canon, Marvel often writes Doom and Stark as mirrored minds, two men who would absolutely clash if they ever lived on the same timeline. And now that Stark is gone, there's finally space for Doom to arrive without any direct overlap, Mobius told Loki. In Loki Season 1, Episode 1, and Marvel may have casually dropped one of the creepiest stories in the entire multiverse saga, almost like a throwaway line. I didn't even catch it the first time. When Loki starts questioning how the TVA chooses who gets to live and who gets erased, Mobius mentions an old mission. A TVA squad was sent near the Black Sea in Eastern Europe to prune a variant who would cause 5,000 future deaths. But there's a catch. The variant was an 8-year-old boy. Mobius hesitated. Branches started forming. Other hunters died, and eventually his partner, Ravonna Renslayer, stepped in and pruned the kid herself. On the surface, it plays like a moral anecdote. But once you understand how the TVA really works, it gets way stranger, because the TVA doesn't stop mass death in general. They let genocides happen. They ignore apocalypses, and they only intervene when a timeline threatens the sacred outcome. Their real job, even if they don't realize it, is preventing dangerous rival variants of He Who Remains from ever existing. So if they were ordered to erase this child, it likely wasn't simply because he'd kill 5,000 people. It's because what he eventually became would threaten Kang himself. Now add the specifics. Eastern Europe, near the Black Sea, one lone individual destined to become a major killer, and important enough that the TVA wants him removed early. Who fits that profile? In Marvel lore, there's one villain who matches that vibe perfectly: Dr. Victor Von Doom. Latveria's placement shifts across stories, but it's consistently framed as Eastern European, often around the Romania region and not too far from the Black Sea. Doom is also famous for being a timeline reshaper. Entire futures swing depending on whether he lives, rules, or is stopped. That suddenly makes the TVA's urgency feel logical. Loki Episode 1 dropped in June 2021. Around the same general period, people claim Marvel was reassessing its big multiverse direction behind the scenes. And now that Marvel has moved away from Kang as the main saga villain and toward Dr. Doom, Mobius's story feels less like filler and more like a planted seed. Tony Stark always knew. There's a moment in Avengers Endgame that fans keep circling back to. When Tony Stark travels back to April 7th, 1970, he unexpectedly runs into his father, Howard Stark, in an elevator. Howard is carrying flowers and mentions that his wife Maria is expecting. Suddenly, Tony freezes, and some fans take that reaction as proof that Tony isn't just Tony, that he's something else, that he somehow knows there's a contradiction. I already tackled this on my other video, so make sure to check that out after this for more details for this specific scene in Endgame. Stark's nightmare was Doom's. Back in Avengers Age of Ultron, Tony Stark experiences one of the most unsettling visions in the entire MCU. He sees the Avengers dead, the Earth broken, and alien forces overwhelming everything. Suddenly, Captain America turns to him and says, "You could have saved us." At the time, it's framed as a nightmare, a fear-induced hallucination caused by Wanda Maximoff's mind manipulation. Tony shrugs it off, but it completely changed him. It's the moment that pushes him toward Ultron, toward control, toward the belief that he alone has to protect the world. Fast forward years later to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Marvel quietly reframes what dreams actually are. According to that film, dreams are windows into alternate realities. When you dream, you're seeing another version of yourself, another universe playing out somewhere in the multiverse. So once that rule is established, Tony's nightmare suddenly looks different, because what he saw wasn't abstract, it was very specific and coherent, and it lined up frighteningly well with the future the MCU is now heading toward: a broken Avengers lineup and a world-ending threat. So with that, it raises a possible possibility. What if Tony wasn't seeing a fear? What if he was seeing another timeline? One where the Avengers fall and the consequences of that failure give rise to something worse? Not Ultron, but Dr. Doom. And if Avengers Doomsday revisits that imagery, even visually, it wouldn't be a retcon. It would be a payoff to something Marvel planted nearly a decade earlier. Endgame's loose ends. By the end of Avengers Endgame, Marvel tells us something that sounds neat and tidy on the surface, but completely falls apart when you look closer. Bruce Banner explains that if you return the Infinity Stones to the exact moment they were taken, the alternate timelines should collapse as if they never existed, except the movie itself immediately contradicts that idea. Let's start with what was clearly handled. The 2012 branch timeline, the one where Loki escapes with the Tesseract, is explicitly pruned by the TVA in Loki. The TVA even says it out loud. What the Avengers did was supposed to happen. You escaping was not, so that branch is gone. But Endgame creates other branches that cannot be erased just by returning stones. The biggest one is 2014. In that timeline, Thanos leaves 2014 and never returns. Nebula leaves 2014 and dies in the future. Gamora leaves 2014 and stays in the present. That means 2014 is permanently altered. There is no Thanos, there's no Nebula, and Gamora never comes back. Returning the Power Stone does nothing to fix that. The MCU itself later tells us that people living outside their native timeline destabilize reality. Doctor Strange even says it directly. Your arrival here confuses and destabilizes reality. So either the TVA aggressively pruned these timelines off-screen, or they were allowed to exist. And if they were allowed to exist, that means Endgame intentionally fractured the multiverse far more than Marvel ever showed us. Now let's talk about the one event that definitely wasn't planned. 1970. Steve and Tony weren't supposed to go there. That detour only happens because of Loki's escape. In that mission, Pym particles are stolen, Howard Stark is influenced, Tony confronts his past emotionally, and Steve learns he can go back and live a life. Nothing about that trip is clean. And unlike the stones, you can't undo character decisions, which leads to the biggest loose end of all. Steve Rogers doesn't just return the stones, he chooses to stay in the past and live an entire life with Peggy Carter. That is a brand new timeline, one created deliberately by a man who knows exactly what he's doing. And here's why this matters for Doom. Endgame doesn't end the multiverse, it breaks it quietly. Loose ends, unpruned branches, people displaced in time, entire realities left unexplored. Because the multiverse saga doesn't need Kang to fall apart, it just needs someone ruthless enough to take control of the mess. And that's where Doctor Doom fits, not as someone who caused the chaos, but as someone who inherits it.